Hi there, it's Jonathan here. This is 3420. We're reading the Book of Deuteronomy in 20 days. Moses' second sermon on the plains of Moab continues to weave methodically through the various laws of the Ten Commandments. If you look for it, you'll see the outline of the commandments in all of these more detailed teachings. We're in chapter 19 and Moses is explaining to the people about cities of refuge. Deuteronomy, along with its corresponding teaching in Numbers chapter 35, shows us God's heart for justice. Here the Lord is providing gracious provision of safe haven for someone guilty of manslaughter. The Numbers version states that there were to be 3 cities each side of the Jordan. Here Moses mentions just 3 in the promised land. Verse 8 reinforces the constant language of covenant. God is providing the land he promised to Israel's ancestors. If they carefully follow and love the Lord and walk in obedience, they will experience the favour of God. Such conditional promises. One might be forgiven for being a little confused when the book of Job teaches that not everything in life can be explained by the doctrine of retribution. Here Israel is told with clarity, if you obey, things will go well for you. Don't miss the remarkable importance of land in verse 10. Back in Genesis, we were told that Abel's blood cried out from the land to the Lord for justice. Here, similarly, blood shed on land, particularly the land of promise, needs to be accounted for. I find this intriguing. As I read, I regularly have to stop and process my horror at the seeming brutality of many of the Lord's commands. Sometimes, with all due respect, he seems bloodthirsty. Here we're reminded that the strict commands of the Lord regarding bloodshed come precisely from his incredibly high regard for human life, and the life is in the blood. Verse 13, here we find that chilling refrain again, show no mercy, you must purge from Israel the guilt. Verse 14 is easily skimmed over. Let's not do that. Yahweh is very, very interested in justice. He instructs his people to never move their neighbour's boundary marker. This clearly takes us back to the Ten Commandments. One can imagine how easy it would be in a primitive society to steal land from your neighbour. There's no council ready to impose justice. God's people shall treat each other with equity as image bearers of God himself. In the midst of what often seems like a barbaric time in history, Yahweh lifts the bar, as it were, and constantly calls his people upward. Verse 15, more than one witness is required for establishing a testimony. And when a case has been made, the punishment must fit the crime. This leads us to the famous law referred to in Latin as lex talionis, an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, hand for hand. Yahweh is actually being gracious in these laws. He's limiting the extent that revenge for damages can be implemented. Moving from individual issues of justice to matters of war, Moses in chapter 20 begins by exhorting the people to not be afraid because the battle belongs to the Lord. He then, almost surprisingly, moves into a whole section of teaching that reveals God's softer side. The people are about to go to war, but if you have a new house, a new vineyard, a new marriage, or even you're just afraid to go to war, Moses says, take a breather and head home to enjoy your stuff. Seems like an early form of work-life balance theory on steroids to me. This continues in verse 10, where Yahweh instructs the people to seek peace with an opposing army first, so that bloodshed might be minimized. This is in contrast to the way they are to treat any of the 7 people groups they will find west of the Jordan. These people are to be destroyed completely, showing no mercy at all, once again to avoid the polluting that will inevitably come from syncretism with other religions. Chapter 21 is a very early form of teaching to protect the rights of women. In a patriarchal society such as this, there was far less power available to women in general. Here Yahweh specifically instructs that a woman taken after war must be allowed to have her head shaved and her nails trimmed, and in so doing given the chance to grieve the loss of her own family and maybe husband. This is symbolic rather than supposing her grief is over in just a month. After the month, she can be given in marriage to an Israelite. This allows the woman to have a rebirthing experience culturally as her fingernails and hair grows back, taking on the culture of Israel. This is all meant to communicate God's grace for the alien and stranger in the land. If things don't work out in this marriage, again, God teaches that the woman is to be treated with as much respect in divorce as possible. 21:18 is a passage referring to a wayward son. It doesn't appear that there is any evidence in history of Israel actually enacting this rule, which demands that a wayward son be stoned to death for disrespecting his parents. Again, an example of how seriously God takes his own 10 commandments, which do stipulate that parents must be obeyed. We've run out of time, which might be fortuitous with these difficult issues before us. Enjoy God's word.